This boy reincarnated into the body of a villain from a story, but he completely messed up the original plot and ended up becoming nothing more than a toy in the hands of the heroines. This series is really good, so let's jump right into the video. At the Campbell estate, a young man wakes up feeling confused because, if he remembers correctly, he may have died in a car accident. However, when he looks at his hands, he wonders if he has traveled back in time. His room is decorated with luxurious Western-style furniture and ornaments. His face looks just like it did when he was around 17 or 18 years old. The boy begins to panic, thinking he may have been kidnapped. But in the middle of all that despair, he looks into the mirror once more and realizes he was incredibly handsome when he was young. To be honest, the restoration turned out great, and perhaps this world is like a game. Still, he thinks that being transported to another world after being hit by a truck, when he had been nothing more than an overweight, middle-aged man, was something that only happened in manhwas and anime. To make sure, he picks up a small knife and lightly cuts his finger, which immediately begins to bleed. He rolls around in pain as he realizes that all of this is real because the pain feels incredibly vivid. So he really has been transmigrated. Suddenly, memories begin to flood his mind. Moon Campbell had offended the royal family, lost his noble title, and been demoted to a mere commoner. His crime was unforgivable, and he had been sentenced to exile. He would never again be allowed to set foot inside the Empire, and if he did, he would be executed without mercy. The protagonist cannot believe it because when he first saw the name, he thought it was merely a coincidence, but he never expected to end up inside the body of that idiot, a yellow-haired villain who was not even an elite monster. Moon Campbell was a character from the strongest female character in history, the world's most popular light novel during the year before his reincarnation. Moreover, it was one of the few works he followed every single day. The story revolved around the heroine, the illegitimate daughter of a once prestigious noble family that had fallen into ruin. As time passed, she grew stronger, slaughtered every kind of monster and demon in her path, fought back against all odds, and eventually became the heroine who saved the world. Moon Campbell was nothing more than a brainless, yellow-haired villain. During the first part of the novel, he abused his family's influence to bully the heroine, constantly sending people to kill her while doing nothing more than providing experience points for her party. In the end, all of his schemes collapsed, the entire House Campbell was dragged into the disaster, and he was banished to the frontier, where he eventually ended up living as a beggar. After that, he disappeared from the story for more than 20 chapters. The protagonist cannot believe that he has become that very man who refused to be a proper noble and existed only to cause trouble for the heroine. He had imagined that after being reincarnated, he would become the protagonist, but instead he was reborn as that fool who was destined to be nothing more than a stepping stone. So what was he supposed to do in a situation like this? While pondering the matter, one of his maids knocks on the door and he tells her to come in. She is Anne, a maid of House Campbell assigned to serve Moon Campbell. She informs him that the outfit he will wear at the following day's banquet has already arrived, and that the lady of the house instructed her to bring it to him so he could try it on. Moon tells her to leave the clothes there because he will look at them shortly. Anne notices a little blood on her young master's face and asks whether he is injured. The protagonist explains that he accidentally cut his finger and that it is nothing serious, asking for something to stop the bleeding, or at least a bandage she can give him. Anne looks a little confused because she has no idea what a bandage is. Even so, although she does not understand what her young master is talking about, if all he needs is to stop the bleeding, she can take care of that. Kneeling before him, she gently holds his hand and licks his finger, leaving the protagonist both surprised and embarrassed. Anne looks at his finger and sees that the bleeding has stopped. Since every drop of her young master's blood is extremely precious, she asks him not to hurt himself again. Still somewhat stunned by the situation, Moon says he will remember that and avoid getting injured in the future. Anne tells him that if there is nothing else he needs, she will return to her duties. As soon as she leaves the room, Moon becomes so excited about what just happened that, although he feels it is a little immoral, he starts rolling around on his bed because that gentle, black-haired maid was simply adorable. Outside the room, Anne pauses for a moment and thinks that her young master had just thanked her for her excellent work. Moon stops for a moment and reflects that this body belongs to an idiot who is the son of a duke, possesses high status, good looks, immense wealth, and even has a personal maid at his disposal. So why did he have to provoke the heroine? If he remembers correctly, the real reason that man was exiled was because he had drugged the Empire's powerful third princess during her coming-of-age ceremony. But now that he knows the problem, solving it should be easy. All he has to do is avoid provoking the heroine and refrain from doing anything stupid during the ceremony. Now he has a chance to change his own fate because he knows everything that is going to happen. If he wants to remain a wealthy and successful young master in the future, he needs to think carefully and remember exactly when the ceremony will take place. His maid had just delivered the clothes for the coming-of-age ceremony scheduled for the very next day. The realization leaves him utterly shocked. He lies back down on the bed and starts calling out for a system, his grandfather, a god, or even a monk. But no one answers. After all, had he not pulled 5 golden cards in 10 draws during his previous life? Even if one of them had been the result of a lifetime's worth of luck, he should not be treated like this. The ceremony is the very next day, and it is already too late. He has no idea whether personally apologizing to the heroine will be enough to erase the resentment of the past. Perhaps it would not even be asking too much if she demanded that he kiss her feet in public before forgiving him. Even so, he believes he can do it, because a real man is capable of swallowing his pride and enduring humiliation. Simply kissing her feet is nothing compared to having both his hands and feet broken and ending up homeless. Therefore, all he has to do is endure that humiliation by himself. With his plan settled, he believes everything has been resolved. When they meet the following day, he will run over to her, kneel down, and perform 3 full kowtows. While celebrating his brilliant new strategy, something suddenly appears on the ceiling and falls directly onto his head. Moon gets angry and asks which idiot threw it at him, but when he turns around, he sees a book and realizes that his salvation has finally arrived. He hugs the book because the gods have not abandoned him after all. Even if he is nothing more than a loser destined to become cannon fodder, everything will change as long as he has some kind of cheat ability. From this moment onward, he will officially change the original ending and rewrite his destiny. As the saying goes, fate is in his own hands. However, the moment he opens the book, he cannot believe what he is seeing because there is not a single word written inside.
It's blank.
What?
Here, look.
No.
He thinks there may be some special method of activating it, considering the Western European fantasy setting. However, when the book struck his head, it left a small cut, and blood trickled down his face before dripping onto one of the blank pages. The instant his blood touches the book, a powerful dark aura begins to emerge. Suddenly, everything goes black, and when he opens his eyes, he finds himself badly injured and chained up. A strange woman stares at him from an unnervingly close distance with her eyes wide open and says that he has finally awakened because she has been waiting for him for a very long time. Moon complains that it hurts, but the woman says the pain is inevitable and that it all serves to teach him a valuable lesson. He has no idea how heartbroken she is at that moment, because he is supposed to remain wicked, cruel, and selfish. He should bring suffering to others instead of showing kindness and make everyone hate him. Only then could he belong to her and to her alone. However, he has changed his heart and that simply will not do. Still, he should not worry because, no matter how long it takes, she will cleanse him completely with her love once again. Then they will remain together forever, and not even death will be able to separate them. At that exact moment, he returns to reality and wakes up in terror, trying to understand what had just happened. He thinks it might have been a dream, yet he can still feel the pain on his body, and even if it really was only a dream, everything felt incredibly real. So perhaps it was a dream from the future trying to show him something. Before losing consciousness, he remembers that the strange book had flipped through its pages like a madman and caused him to lose a great deal of blood. If it truly was a vision of the future caused by that book, then that ending must have been brought about by something he did wrong. The moment he opens the book once more, he sees a sentence written in red across a dark page stating that he cannot change his own destiny. The entire book transforms into that dark energy and enters his head. Moon thinks it may be a warning that he cannot alter the original story. Otherwise, he will meet that terrible ending, but he cannot understand why, since it would lead to such a horrifying outcome. Perhaps his thoughts are nothing more than illusions, and if he wishes to survive, he must choose the path of destruction. Suddenly, he realizes that when he thinks about it that way, the ending of the original novel does not seem so bad since at least he was still alive in the end. That useless son of a wealthy second-generation family had no ability to support himself. So after being exiled, he ended up homeless. But the protagonist was different. He was a warrior who had faced countless challenges and hardships in the modern city, and in any case, the novel never said what Moon Campbell would become in the end. After being exiled, he could start over from scratch in another country since he did not think there was anything worth missing about that aristocratic system, which was nothing more than a privileged class supported at the expense of hardworking people. As a true working man, he could still do very well in that other world by relying on his own hands and knowledge. At dinner, the protagonist is amazed because he has never eaten such a delicious steak or tasted such exquisite wine in his entire life. That privileged class truly is incredible. Duchess Noyce Campbell asks the protagonist what happened since he seems so happy. The Empire's Duke, Leopold, also known as Lon Campbell, believes that his son must be excited about the banquet for the coming-of-age ceremony the following day, since it will be one of the most important banquets of Moon's life. The protagonist agrees, saying that he's looking forward to it very much. His mother becomes emotional when she realizes how quickly her little boy has grown, and says that she does not want to let him go. After all, her son will undoubtedly be the person who attracts the most attention at the banquet the following day, and she wonders how many young ladies from noble families will become captivated by him. Lon thinks that will not be possible because the protagonist already has a fiancée, Celicia. If she sees him getting close to other girls, she may become jealous, and that will be difficult to explain. Noyce does not particularly like that idea because she does not like the princess. She seems too cold and lacks charm, so she is not worthy of Moon. However, the Duke asks his wife not to say such things, because if the two of them are not worthy of each other, then no one else would be. Moon thinks that his beloved parents are far too confident that they have an outstanding son, but he does not even know which princess they are talking about. He manages to remember that she is the Empire's third princess, a sweet and pure girl blessed by God, and a strong candidate for the title of the most beautiful woman in the Empire. In the original world, she gained countless admirers because of her cold demeanor and the contrast between her distant appearance and warm heart, always becoming the center of attention wherever she went. Apparently, his parents have no idea what kind of useless bastard their son truly is, because they are the only two people in that world who would treat him like a treasure. In the original story, they were both good people, but it was a pity that they had ended up with a son like that. According to the plot, they would also be implicated in the incident at the coming-of-age ceremony, and afterward, the entire family would be forced to leave the Empire's high society circles and disappear from the story. Even if the book says that he cannot escape his fate, the destiny of being exiled with his limbs broken is far too difficult to accept. Even with his current way of thinking, he cannot accept such an outcome. Therefore, he needs to come up with a way to act because even if he cannot change his own fate, he may still be able to change the fate of others. After analyzing the incident, he realizes that attacking the princess was not the true reason for his punishment and exile. The real reason was that her father became involved in a crime of treason, which caused Duke Campbell, who possessed military authority, to be drawn into a struggle for power and overthrown by the Empire's elite and aristocracy. Therefore, assuming that the ending cannot be changed, his family must be removed from the incident as a form of protection after his exile. Besides, someone needs to take the blame, and after thinking about it carefully, there does not seem to be a better place for that than this Western fantasy world. A little later, he realizes that only one day remains before the ceremony, and that it is already too late to make proper preparations. Therefore, he will need to adapt when the time comes. The most urgent matter now is dealing with the consequences of offending the royal family. The pure young woman who would become the future empress of the empire was a magical genius who appeared only once every 1,000 years, so it was obvious that ordinary drugs would not be enough to incapacitate her. Moreover, he cannot remember that substance at all, which means nothing like it exists in the mansion, but perhaps there is something in that place. Therefore, he needs to find an excuse to leave later and verify whether, just as in the original story, there truly is a hideout for criminals and evil forces. Otherwise, trying to shift the blame using words alone will be useless. While thinking about this, he becomes distracted and bumps into one of the maids, causing her to spill the tea she had prepared for the lord and lady of the house. Moon apologizes, explaining that he was distracted by other matters and failed to notice her. As soon as the girl realizes that he is young Master Moon, she becomes terrified, begs for forgiveness, and tries to clean his clothes. However, when she notices that they have been stained, she thinks she is doomed. Desperate, she begins to cry and pleads for mercy, saying that she had not done it intentionally. She begs him not to beat her or throw her naked into the street, promising never to make that kind of mistake again. The protagonist cannot understand how the previous owner of this body managed to leave such a terrible impression on others, since only a little tea had spilled on his clothes. He tries to ease the situation and gently holds her arm, telling her that everything is fine because it was only a minor accident, and that she does not need to be punished for it. He asks whether she is feeling all right because she seems a little warm. Moon pulls her closer and presses his body against hers, finally understanding why she feels so hot. She probably has not even realized that she has a fever. This was an exclusive method of measuring temperature that he had used in his previous life. The poor girl does not understand what is really happening, but the protagonist continues checking her temperature and realizes that her forehead is hot enough to fry an egg. He then asks why she does not take some time to rest. The girl explains that the ceremony banquet will take place the following day and that the household is currently short-staffed But the protagonist insists, saying that she cannot work while she is ill. Anne arrives at that moment and looks somewhat surprised. The protagonist thinks that she has arrived at the perfect time and asks her to take the girl somewhere to rest. He asks for her name, and the young woman introduces herself as Noel. Moon says that it is a pleasure to meet her and once again asks Anne to take Noel to rest. Anne explains to the young master that the ceremony will take place the following evening and that every maid in the mansion currently has her own responsibilities. Therefore, if Noel rests, the workload of the other maids will become much heavier. The protagonist says that if that is the case, they can hire people from outside the mansion, because it is impossible for such a massive estate to be unable to hire at least a few extra workers. Besides, he has already made his decision and asks her to inform the head maid that every servant who is feeling unwell should be allowed to rest, and that their positions will be temporarily filled by people from outside the mansion. After all, he does not want a group of sick people appearing at his coming-of-age ceremony the following day and causing trouble for the guests. Anne simply accepts the order, saying that she will deliver the message to the head maid. As soon as he leaves, the two girls remain there watching him. Noel remarks that she remembers very clearly that the young master previously said he did not want strangers dirtying the mansion and therefore refused to allow them to recruit outside help. Anne tells her not to overthink it, to simply follow the young master's orders and to get some rest. However, Anne thinks that some things truly have changed compared to the past and that it seems the plan must be put into action as soon as possible. In another part of the mansion, the protagonist searches for something because in order to deal with a magical genius like that princess, the only possible method would be to use a special hallucinogenic potion. Not only was it difficult and expensive to prepare, but it was also illegal. The only place where it could be sold was he finally finds what he was looking for. It was something extremely difficult to obtain in the original story, a VIP pass to the underground black market. In Chambers' commercial district, the protagonist walks accompanied by his escorts. He asks them to wait there for a moment because he would like to buy some gold and silver jewelry for his father and mother to wear the following day. As soon as he gets away from his escort, the protagonist heads downward and begins searching because, according to what he remembers, deep within the sewers of Belrand, outside the royal city, there was a place. After walking for a while, he finally finds what he was looking for. A person standing in front of the door orders him to stop and asks who is there. The protagonist merely answers, "Sewer rats." The gatekeeper asks why he has come, and the protagonist says that he is searching for scraps before presenting his credentials. With that, he manages to enter Leopold's secret black market. There are potion ingredients and magical beasts there, making the place worthy of a fantasy world. If he remembers correctly, it also seems that slaves are being sold there, and one of the heroine's future allies apparently purchased one of them. However, that can be dealt with another time, because the most important thing now is to focus on his real objective. As soon as he enters a shop, a masked person says that they finally have a customer, greets him, and asks what he would like to see, explaining that even though the shop is small, it still has a little bit of everything. Moon says that he would like that colorless and odorless potion, specifically designed for mages, capable of leaving the target unconscious for several hours after ingesting it. The seller says that he understands and that apparently rich people enjoy playing that way. He knows a few good slave shops and could recommend them in exchange for a referral fee. Furthermore, if Moon mentions the seller's name, he will even receive a discount. Moon says that he does not need that and that apparently he will have to leave, but the seller shouts for him to wait a moment because he has already found the product. However, that treasure is extremely rare and stored somewhere else, so he needs to wait at least a little while. The protagonist stares at the seller and thinks that the person is wearing a mask that covers their entire face. Furthermore, their voice has been magically altered, making it practically impossible to determine whether they are a man or a woman. The seller emphasizes that 2 bottles had been prepared 2 days earlier and that they were inside that box. The protagonist continues analyzing the person, and judging by the seller's tone and behavior, not to mention that incredible figure, the seller is probably a woman. It is entirely possible that her management skills are even more impressive than her appearance, considering that she managed to secure a prominent position in the black market, where all kinds of people gather and gangs constantly take advantage of one another. Therefore, if he can establish a good relationship with her, perhaps he will be able to receive her help when he is exiled by the Empire in the future. Still searching for the merchandise, the seller asks him to wait just a little longer. The protagonist says that it is fine because he is not in such a hurry. Suddenly, another person enters, saying that she would like to buy a special type of drug that is extremely powerful but leaves no magical traces afterward. The seller says that she has something like that and asks her to wait, thinking that normally no one is interested in that kind of potion, and that it is truly strange for 2 people to appear wanting to buy it. The protagonist looks at the woman who just entered and notices the faint fragrance she gives off, wondering whether all women truly need such things, since buying such a powerful drug probably means that she intends to harm someone. Unfortunately, he cannot do anything about it. A short while later, the seller places two bottles on the table, but the protagonist thinks that their color is far too conspicuous. The seller explains that despite the intense color, it disappears completely when mixed with something like red wine. Compared to that minor flaw, its advantages are far greater. A single drop is capable of making even an elephant faint immediately and remain unconscious for 2 or 3 hours. Moon is impressed by how powerful the drug is and asks whether that is really true. The seller says that it is because he will receive exactly what he pays for. If he does not believe her, he can simply test it. But if he ends up falling asleep there, she will charge 5,000 per hour for taking care of him. Both customers say that there is no need. The seller says that the special sleeping potion costs 130,000 and that the shop never negotiates prices. The other woman says that she does not have all that money and does not intend to pay the bill with money, but with information instead. The seller points out that 130,000 is not a small amount, but the woman claims that the information is worth 130,000 and that to certain people it may be worth far more than that. The seller becomes curious and takes a look at the information. As soon as she reads the paper, she asks whether the woman is certain that it is true. The woman replies that it is up to the seller to determine whether the information is true by using her abilities as the shop owner. After thinking for a moment, the seller agrees because the information is indeed highly relevant and hands over the potion. As soon as the other woman takes her potion and leaves, the seller asks how the protagonist intends to pay. He hands over his card, but the seller asks him to put the crystal card away. Furthermore, she would like to give him that small bottle as a gift. The protagonist asks what the gift is for. The seller says that the other bottle should be used together with the first one and that he will have a better experience if he combines it with the red bottle. Moon thanks her and asks about the information that the woman just sold. The seller's eyes shine as she asks whether the young master is also interested in that information. Considering that they are old friends, she could sell it to him for a modest price. He asks whether it would cost 90,000, but she replies that it costs 900,000. Moon simply says that he does not need it and leaves. He thinks that she almost made 7 times the profit merely by reselling information right in front of him, which is highly suspicious. Furthermore, that black market is filled with people seeking profit. Even if he spends money, it is quite likely that, rather than helping him in the future, they will still try to deceive him. Therefore, he needs to find a more trustworthy partner. As soon as he leaves, the seller bids him farewell and tells him to come again. She had thought that only the useless young master of the Campbell family's coming-of-age ceremony would take place the following day and had not expected the third princess to attend as well. Now, in that critical situation, the Duke's mansion needed to recruit outsiders because of a labor shortage, so she had to consider who might purchase that valuable information. If she remembered correctly, the second prince had never liked his sister, and Duke Raymond had always had problems with Grand Duke Campbell. This was extremely interesting. She could sell the information to both sides, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. The following night, at the protagonist's family mansion, numerous guests begin to arrive. The Duke and the protagonist approach a man who introduces his third daughter and asks her to greet the Grand Duke. However, as soon as she looks at the protagonist, the girl becomes embarrassed and runs away, saying that her mother needs her. The young woman's father looks somewhat uncomfortable and apologizes to the protagonist, explaining that his daughter is far too shy. Moon asks him not to worry because it was nothing. In fact, it was their fault for not welcoming the two of them properly, so he should make himself comfortable. However, the protagonist had already expected that reaction. It was not only that girl, because the gazes of all the others looked exactly the same, since the previous owner of that body truly had an awful reputation. Lon tells his son that he is very satisfied with his performance that night. He had been somewhat worried before, but now it seemed that such concern was unnecessary, since his son was the main figure of the ceremony. After that night, he would no longer be a child but a true man of the Campbell family, so he needed to do his best. Suddenly, someone shouts for everyone to remain silent and welcome the third person in the imperial line of succession, the pure white maiden blessed by the goddess of ice and snow, the empire's third princess, Her Highness Cilicia. The protagonist's father tells him that he needs to greet the other 2 dukes, so he will leave the princess in Moon's care. Moon walks over to Cilicia and greets her. She looks at the protagonist and says that it has been a very long time since they last met. Moon agrees and adds that she looks enchanting that night. The princess is flattered and thanks him for the compliment, since it is extremely rare to hear that kind of remark from young Master Moon. He becomes slightly embarrassed because the way she says it makes him sound like an ill-mannered person incapable of controlling his own mouth. However, the princess believes that he is exactly that kind of person. The protagonist decides to change the subject, saying that she is probably exhausted from the journey and should go inside to rest for a while because the banquet will be served later. As soon as she walks away, the protagonist feels relieved that she has finally left. Although she is incredibly beautiful, she is also frightening, as expected of the original female protagonist. Celicia also noticed that Moon seemed slightly different that night, perhaps because he was being more polite to everyone. Suddenly, whispers begin to spread, saying that the illegitimate daughter is also there, the woman who had recently quarreled with her fiancé. They had heard that Count Bugard had just given up the position of heir and questioned how an illegitimate daughter, who was also a woman, could possibly be qualified to inherit the title of Count. The protagonist looks at her and thinks that the true protagonist of the original novel has finally arrived, the main female character of that world, Ariel Bugard. She greets the protagonist, saying that they have finally met again, and asks how he has been. Before he can answer, another man intervenes, insulting the woman and asking how she dares speak to the young master in that manner. However, Moon covers the man's mouth, orders him to remain silent, and politely answers her question, saying that he has been doing very well. Ariel is shocked and tries to understand what has happened to that man. He did not call her an illegitimate daughter as he had before. Perhaps his pea-sized brain had finally managed to remember her name properly, or perhaps he had reconsidered certain things. There could also be something happening behind the scenes that she still did not know about. The other woman, looking somewhat shy, tries to speak to Ariel. At that exact moment, the protagonist extends his hand toward her and says that she must be Miss Leah, leaving the poor girl stunned when she realizes that the young master truly knows her name. With a smile on his face, he says that of course he should know the name of such an important guest that evening, Miss Leah Angel. However, before he can touch her hand, Ariel steps in front of her and asks what he thinks he is doing. The protagonist tries to explain himself, but she continues, saying that she is only there for the sake of his father and does not care in the slightest about what happened or what will happen to him. However, if he dares to harbor any improper thoughts toward Leah, he will deeply regret it. The protagonist thinks that apparently the girl has a rather strange impression of the previous owner of this body, so changing that perception quickly will be difficult. However, that is not what matters most. After that night, their destinies will be like parallel lines that never cross. From that point on, she will become the savior, while he will become an ordinary worker, and together they will each have a bright future. Under the watchful eyes of his parents, he then finishes his coming-of-age speech at the age of 18 before all the nobles of the empire. From that night onward, he officially becomes the heir to the family, but unfortunately, if everything follows the original story, that status will last only for that single night. After finishing his speech, he thinks that it is finally time to put his plan into action, and eventually finds the princess. He approaches her, apologizes for leaving the noble princess alone, and says that, as the host of the celebration, he has been terribly rude. He then asks whether he may have the honor of inviting her to dance. The princess is slightly surprised and asks whether he truly wishes to invite her, and the protagonist says yes, because it would be a great honor for him. She hesitates for a moment before accepting, but since it is his coming-of-age ceremony, she has no reason to refuse. As soon as she accepts his invitation, everyone watches in amazement. The two of them dance together in each other's arms before the crowd, and the princess compliments him, saying that he dances very well. Moon thanks her for the compliment but says that he is still only a beginner. However, the princess can no longer hide it and admits that he really has changed. The protagonist looks slightly confused and asks whether she thinks he is not behaving like a true noble. However, the princess says that is not what she means. Rather, it is the way he invites people, because she clearly remembers when he invited a viscount's daughter to the last university ball. He had told her that she should feel honored because the young master had graciously decided to grant her the privilege of dancing with him. Moon becomes somewhat embarrassed and tries to explain that it was not exactly like that, but the princess asks whether she imitated him correctly. The protagonist simply admits his mistake, saying that he is a new man now and would like to ask her to forget what happened in the past. While they continue dancing, he asks whether, after the ball, she could accompany him to his room. The princess points out that even though the two of them are engaged, such behavior would be inappropriate for both families. Moon knows exactly what she means and promises that he has no intention of crossing any boundaries. Since she brought up the subject, that is precisely what he would like to discuss with her in private later. The princess looks somewhat puzzled and asks whether he truly needs to speak with her alone about their relationship. Moon knows very well that the engagement is not to her liking and that their marriage is nothing more than a political arrangement made by His Majesty to maintain good relations with his father. That had been the king's wish, but if she wished to call off the engagement, she is somewhat surprised by the proposal, and the protagonist knows full well that doing so would affect the reputation of the royal family, including her relationship with His Majesty. He leans in slightly and quietly says that, at the very least, they both agree that the engagement should be cancelled, and that, if they work together, perhaps they can resolve the matter in a better way. Celicia realizes that this is definitely something they should discuss in private. The protagonist thinks that she has taken the bait because, in order to keep the story on its original course, he has to do this. However, the princess asks where his room is, since there is no need to wait until the ball is over to talk. Two maids see the pair heading upstairs, and one of them comments that the princess has actually gone upstairs with that foolish young master, so they need to act as quickly as possible because this is the territory of the Lionheart King. A short while later, after arriving in his room, Moon offers her some wine, but she apologizes and says that she cannot accept because she does not drink. The protagonist explains that it is only red wine, but she refuses anyway because she cannot consume even a single drop of alcohol. The protagonist eventually says that it is fine, but in reality it is anything but fine, because the novel never explained how the original Moon had deceived the princess. Furthermore, the drug is bright red, so there is no way to mix it into another beverage unnoticed. To avoid making the atmosphere awkward, he asks what she would like to drink instead. The princess requests a cup of coffee, but the protagonist says that he only has black tea or red wine. Since there are no other options and she cannot drink wine, she reluctantly chooses the tea. The protagonist asks her to wait just a few minutes because he will prepare it immediately, but the princess does not believe that leaving that man alone to prepare anything is a good idea. While the protagonist prepares to add the drug to her teacup, he remembers that a single drop would already be enough, but adding a few extra drops cannot hurt when dealing with such a powerful mage. Besides, he has no idea what is inside the other bottle, so it is safer not to use it. Celicia suddenly appears beside him and asks whether he is finished. Startled, the protagonist quickly turns his back to her, saying that everything is ready and asking her to return to the sofa because he will bring the tea over immediately. However, at that moment, he accidentally drops the bottle containing the aphrodisiac into her tea and the bottle containing the sleeping potion into his own tea. As soon as she walks away, he lets out a deep sigh of relief because he had been extremely worried. Fortunately, that potion produces no magical fluctuations, otherwise he would have been exposed. However, when he glances to the side, he realizes that his own medicine has been wasted, leaving him devastated inside because he had intended to dilute that liquid with water to produce 10,000 sleeping potions and sell them after his exile, earning his first fortune. Now it is all gone. The princess calls for him and the protagonist walks over to the center of the room, apologizing for the delay. As soon as she picks up the tea, she notices that the Campbell family's black tea has taken on a reddish hue and seems to shimmer slightly. Moon tries to deceive her by saying that it is a precious tea imported from the East that his family has just acquired. The princess asks whether that is really true because, if so, he can drink it first. Moon asks whether she truly believes that he tampered with the drinks, but the princess explains that he is being overly sensitive. Since he is the host, he should taste the tea first because that is basic noble etiquette. However, before he can take a sip, she picks up his teacup instead, saying that his tea looks better than hers, and asks whether he would mind if they switched. As soon as she drinks it, however, she quickly becomes drowsy and falls asleep on the sofa. He thinks it was very clever to put the drug into both cups because otherwise his plan would not have worked. Furthermore, that secret drug is powerful enough to knock someone out with only a single drop. The original story never mentioned that the princess could not drink alcohol, so perhaps the original Moon had also put the drug into her tea just as he did. However, this is not the time to dwell on that. According to the story, the female protagonist is supposed to burst in and deal with them after they lose consciousness, so he needs to prepare everything quickly. He lowers her stockings slightly and adjusts her clothes, but then decides that it will not work. If he loosens the lower part of her clothing any further, she will be too exposed and might catch a cold, so he decides that simply messing up her hair will be enough. After finishing preparing the scene, he starts getting himself ready as well, removing his clothes until he is wearing only his trousers. Now that everything is ready, all he has to do is wait for the heroine to arrive. He looks at the clock and realizes that time keeps passing, but she never appears. Half an hour has already gone by, and in the original story, Ariel should have arrived by now to rescue the princess and defeat him. He tries to remember exactly how that scene unfolded. Ariel's clothes had been accidentally stained by a gravely ill maid from the Duke's mansion. Afterwards, she went to the restroom to clean herself up, noticed that something was wrong, and caught the protagonist just as he was about to assault the princess. He remembers that the sick maid might have been Noel, but because he had ordered her to rest, he had probably changed the original story. That is a serious problem. Suddenly, the princess begins to wake up, and the distracted protagonist tries to calm himself, thinking that even if something has gone wrong, the important thing is that she was drugged, so there must still be a way to fix everything. However, she is already awakened, and the protagonist wonders why it suddenly feels so cold, because that should not be happening. Celicia grabs him and throws him forcefully to the floor, trying to make advances on him. The protagonist desperately tries to explain and begs Her Highness to listen, because this is not what she thinks. However, Celicia says that she feels incredibly hot and that her body desperately craves him. Moon asks her to stop because what she is doing is wrong, and says that he will call a doctor immediately. However, the princess freezes his hands in place with her ice and moves closer, saying that his body is perfect and that she loves it. At that moment, he was the one who needed help. Moon begs the heroine to appear and save him, otherwise the fabricated story will become reality. While the two of them are in that situation, elsewhere in the palace, Ariel complains that her clothes are stained because that idiot Leah had been careless and spilled cake on her. Suddenly, Ariel hears a noise and asks who is there. Anne appears and apologizes to the young lady, but warns her that the area ahead is restricted within the Duke's mansion, and that she must turn back immediately. Ariel asks what kind of restricted area it is, but the maid apologizes, explaining that it is a secret of the Duke's mansion, and that they are not allowed to reveal it. Anne notices that her clothes are dirty, and Ariel explains that she was looking for a bathroom so she could clean herself with water. Anne says that she can solve the problem and uses cleaning magic, leaving Ariel's clothes completely spotless. Ariel is impressed when she realizes that the Grand Duke is truly worthy of his title, since even the maids in his mansion can use magic. Anne admits that she does know a little magic, but says that it is nothing worth mentioning. Since the cleaning is already done, Ariel can return to the banquet because there will be only a limited amount of pie, and if she likes it that much, she cannot afford to miss it. Ariel loves that kind of pie and immediately runs back, thanking the maid for her help but saying that she now needs to go and get her pie. Ariel continues to feel that something is strange because the maid seemed somewhat suspicious and smelled of blood, not to mention that the other hidden person also seemed suspicious. However, none of that had anything to do with her because everything was happening inside the Duke's mansion. Besides, Princess Celicia was already an adult and the greatest magical prodigy of the younger generation, so how could she possibly be subdued by an idiotic playboy like the protagonist? At that moment, nothing was more important than her pie. The other maid, who had been hiding with a dagger in her hand, says that the girl has already left and asks whether she was also one of the mission's targets. However, the other woman says no, because she had been the target of number 9, their former companion, so they already knew a few things about that girl. If they remembered correctly, number 9 had failed his mission and fallen into that girl's hands. Number 9 was extremely powerful, but she had managed to eliminate him with ease. However, they were wasting too much time, and one of them asks how much longer they have. The other maid replies that it is almost ready, since all of this had been planned against the Lionheart King, Lon Campbell. Even though it was large enough to cover the entire Duke's palace, opening a breach without alerting him was not easy. Therefore, they needed to hurry because if the protagonist appeared or even a princess showed up, the mission would end in complete failure. Even so, they still had plenty of time because when they looked into the room through the wall, those two people appeared to be doing it. Sometime later, the protagonist is exhausted and thinks that everything has finally ended because he ran away as much as he could and preserved his reputation as a great mage for 30 years. If he had taken the final step and done that with the princess, he probably would not have been exiled but executed instead. However, perhaps there is no difference anymore. Celicia points her sword at him and asks him to say his final words before he dies. He tries to make a joke, but she releases even more power and says that since he has no final words, she will personally put an end to him. Moon asks her to wait and give him at least 1 minute. He thinks that this time everything is truly over. If he cannot calm her down, he will certainly be killed and may never receive another chance to be reborn. Now that things have reached this point, all he can do is rely on modern wisdom. He tells the princess that he once had true love standing right in front of him, but he did not know how to cherish it and only realized its value after losing it. If God were to give him another chance, Celicia nearly strikes the protagonist with her sword and asks whether this is why he is so unbearable. Moon asked whether it was really that unpleasant because his feelings were very sincere, and in fact, he had not even managed to reach the ending yet. Therefore, she could simply ignore everything that happened. Celicia asked whether he truly calls that sincerity after using such filthy methods. He was probably only trying to toy with her because if he genuinely liked her, he should have presented himself before her and tried to impress her with his character, strength, and sincerity like a real man. If he had done all of that and managed to make her fall in love with him, perhaps she might have fulfilled their marriage agreement. However, instead of choosing that path, he resorted to despicable and shameful methods. The protagonist tries to apologize once more, saying that he was being completely sincere and had no other choice because he only wanted to achieve that result and would never have tried to hurt her. Celicia tells him to be quiet and kneel immediately. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door. Both of them are surprised, but she tells him to order whoever is outside to leave immediately. Unfortunately, Moon cannot do that because the room is soundproof. Only sounds from outside, such as knocks on the door, can enter, while sounds from inside cannot escape. With no other choice, the princess decides to spare him, at least for the moment, and tells him to put on his clothes and open the door. While getting dressed, he thinks that this is a serious problem and that he has only 3 options left: being killed by the princess herself, publicly hanged by the king, or dismembered by a stranger in a dungeon, just as in his dreams. No matter what happens, he no longer has any way out. Furthermore, Ariel never appeared, and since the matter is almost resolved, it would make no sense for her to show up now. As soon as he opens the door, one of the maids says that the lady of the house noticed that he had been speaking with the princess for quite some time and thought the two of them might be hungry, so she asked the maid to bring them some snacks. Moon thanks her for her hard work and tells her to place everything on the table, but then asks her to wait because he has the impression that he has never seen her before. The maid explains that she was selected the previous day to work at the Duke's mansion, so it is only natural that the young master does not recognize her yet. He asks whether she is there to help with the banquet. However, he clearly remembers Anne saying that there were no spare maid uniforms, so they had hired only ordinary servants. The woman says yes and suddenly launches herself at high speed toward the princess. The protagonist realizes that an assassin has entered the room and that he is not the target of the attack, which means it can only be someone else. He shouts for Celicia to prepare herself, and at the last second, the princess senses the killing intent and manages to defend herself. She asks the maid whether her idiotic brother sent her. The woman apologizes but says that information about her employer is confidential. Besides, the princess does not need to know because she will die there. In that way, the Empire's third princess will have been assassinated inside Grand Duke Campbell's palace, and that will be the end of her. Several magic circles appear and attack simultaneously, causing a massive explosion. The assassin thinks that even the Academy's instructors would be unable to withstand such a powerful magical attack. However, when she realizes that the princess is still standing and almost completely unharmed, she is shocked. The battle between the two continues and grows increasingly intense. The protagonist thinks that when gods fight, mortals are the ones who suffer. If he remains there, he will not even know how he died. However, when he tries to open the door, he discovers that it is locked. He grabs something to protect himself and thinks that it must have been the maid's doing. However, this should not be happening because this part never existed in the original novel. How could someone infiltrate the Duke's mansion in such a manner? Suddenly, he remembers that everything may have begun when he asked the head maid to send all the sick maids to rest and hire outsiders to help. Therefore, perhaps everything changed because of his order. The decision to seek outside assistance the previous night may have caused all of this, not to mention that someone had probably been watching the Duke's mansion the entire time. The only thing he can do now is hope that the princess wins because his body is not strong enough for a battle of that level. However, that woman is targeting only the princess, and the original story has been altered, so he has no idea what will happen. Moon wonders whether the princess's victory could also be considered a good ending. Furthermore, if she happened to lose and die there, no one would ever know what truly happened. The maid remarks that this was expected because the princess truly is the one chosen by the gods. Silesia mentions her fast and precise movements, the magic that created arrows of light, and the spell that made her body heavier. Since none of those spells produced any magical fluctuations, that proves they were probably cast by an accomplice in the room next door. The bandit is impressed that the princess managed to see through her magic with a single glance, exactly as the rumors claimed. However, the rumors were still inaccurate because she herself had eliminated magical geniuses before, but among all of them, Celicia could be considered a true monster. Celicia orders her to reveal who is behind the attack and promises that if she does, her life will be spared. However, the woman merely laughs and asks whether she is serious, because, as an assassin, she should not waste time. But from time to time, even people like them need to buy a few extra minutes. The entire room begins to tremble, and the woman on the other side shouts that the area is completely sealed. So they need to act immediately because she will not be able to maintain it for long. The woman takes out a vial and says that, with the blood of 100 children's hearts, she offers a sacrifice to the god of melting, the lord of the crimson sun, and the great king of destruction. The princess realizes that it is a ritual dedicated to a cursed god and asks the ritual to grant her the power of wind and snow. The pressure is so immense that it sends the princess flying backward. Celicia gets back to her feet and realizes that the woman is a dark priestess. Not only are they sewer rats, but how dare they appear before her? The priestess says that apparently in the princess's eyes, they truly are nothing more than rats, but the great princess, the magical genius, will die at the hands of those very rats. She begins attacking repeatedly, but even after landing several blows, she is impressed because she never expected the princess to be skilled with a sword in addition to mastering magic, as she perfectly protected all of her vital points. However, she can no longer use ice magic. The priestess easily dominates the battle, and the princess is barely able to move properly anymore. The priestess begins to toy with the situation, saying that she feels much more comfortable now and needs to finish her work, but at the last second, the protagonist steps in front of Celicia to protect her. She is surprised and asks why he did that. Even he does not know how to answer. Moon remembers that not long before, one of the maids had warned him that Celicia was the only target, so he was free to leave. At that moment, the exit was right in front of him, and he could have simply walked away and left the princess to die, but he could not bring himself to do it. Moon tightly grabs the priestess's hand and asks Celicia what she's waiting for. The priestess becomes furious and asks how a narcissistic piece of trash dares to do such a thing, but before she can do anything, Celicia puts an end to the battle. Moon lies on the floor, struggling to breathe with his chest pierced through. She kneels beside him and says that, unfortunately, whoever cast the spell from the other side of the door managed to escape, but she needs to confirm that the assassin was not someone he hired to kill her. The protagonist says no, but she still cannot understand why he acted that way to save her, since if she had died there, no one would ever have learned about the dishonorable behavior he had displayed before her. Therefore, that would have been the best possible solution for him. Moon, despite the unbearable pain in his chest, smiles and says that none of that matters, because only a few minutes earlier, the princess herself had told him that if he were a real man and wished to win her heart, he should do so honorably. Therefore, at that moment, he was behaving like a man before her highness. Celicia takes a deep breath and says that within 10 breaths, all the blood will drain from his body. Therefore, he has enough time to say only 3 sentences and may speak his final words, which she will personally deliver to his parents. Moon slowly raises his hand and says that it is better for them that he departed in this manner and that there is no need to leave a message that might make them worry. If he still has time to speak his final words, he would like to direct them toward her. Gently touching the princess's face, he apologizes once more and admits that he truly loves her with all his heart. After speaking his final words, his hand falls and his body no longer possesses any strength. However, the princess asks whether he truly believes that one life and a single apology can compensate for what he did. With immense sorrow in her heart, she refuses to accept his apology and says that he needs to remain alive to pay for his sins. At that moment, the protagonist finds himself in a completely unfamiliar place. All of his exhaustion, dizziness, and even the pain have vanished. He feels comfortable and his body is warm. Perhaps this is the afterlife. The final result was still death, but this time, it had been his own choice. Furthermore, before dying, he acted like a real man in front of a beautiful girl like the princess, and in the end, he lost nothing, even managing to gain a small benefit. Even if someone might consider it a loss, at least he had been given a chance to start over. However, he could not be a piece of trash who took advantage of others and then refused to help them because he was not a heartless idiot like the previous owner of that body. At that exact moment, dark energy begins to appear in front of him, frightening the protagonist. A progress loading message appears directly before his eyes. The progress of greed is at 50%, while the progress of envy is at 99%. The progress of pride, lust, sloth, and wrath is at 0%, while gluttony is at negative 90%. He feels somewhat confused, trying to understand what all of it means. The book appears before him and asks him to continue fighting for. However, the protagonist refuses to keep working, because when he had been about to die, that worthless book had not appeared. But now, after he had already gone through everything, it wanted to drag him back. Still, since he has no choice, he begins to be pulled back into the story. In the sewers beneath the protagonist's family mansion, the other assassin is running because her companion had failed, and if she had known that the idiotic boy would interfere, she would have killed him beforehand. At that exact moment, she hears someone say that he has just heard what she intended to do to his precious son. The woman becomes terrified and begins trembling beneath the Duke's monstrous aura. She realizes that the famous Lionheart, Lon Campbell, is standing directly before her. The Duke continues approaching slowly while drawing his sword, saying that he did not expect that guest to know his humble name. However, he does not remember his family inviting her, so he asks why she is there without an invitation. Furthermore, he would like to know what she went to do inside his precious son's room. Therefore, she may begin explaining everything in detail because he is listening to every single word. A while later, Moon is lying in his bed, And as soon as he opens his eyes, Anne tells him that she is by his side and asks whether he is still feeling any discomfort. If he is, she will call the doctor to examine him. The protagonist tries to get up because he does not need a doctor, but rather needs to use the bathroom. Anne tries to tell him that he still cannot get out of bed, and as soon as the protagonist forces himself to move, he feels a sharp pain in his chest. But she quickly rushes over and catches him. Moon apologizes because all of a sudden his legs became weak and he lost all his strength. Anne tells him there is no need to apologize because taking care of him is her duty. If he needs to urinate, there is no need to go to the bathroom because there is a chamber pot in the room and she can help him. Moon becomes a little suspicious, but she shows him the chamber pot and explains that his mother did not trust anyone else to take care of him. So during those days, she was responsible for giving him his medicine, cleaning his body, and tending to all of his needs. Moon is even more shocked and asks whether that means that during the past few days, she was the one who. Anne replies that she was because even while he was unconscious, it was easy to tell what condition he was in. Whenever the young master writhed in discomfort, she noticed it immediately, so he did not need to worry because there had not been any problems with the bed during all those days. She kneels and asks whether he needs help taking off his pants and relieving himself, but that only makes the protagonist even more uncomfortable. He explains that before, when he was unconscious, he had no choice, but now that he is awake, he cannot allow her to continue doing that kind of thing. Therefore, he would like her to help him walk to the bathroom, and if they go slowly, there should not be any problem. Anne thinks that it is unnecessary, but if that is her young master's wish, she will do as he asks. Anne carries him in her arms because it will be faster that way, so he only needs to be patient. The other maids, who are cleaning nearby, hear a noise, and when they look back, realize that the young master has awakened. Noel is overjoyed and says that she will inform the lady of the house immediately, but the protagonist feels deeply embarrassed by the entire situation. Once they are inside the bathroom, Moon asks Anne to step outside for a moment, but she refuses because protecting him 24 hours a day was an order from his mother. Therefore, she can also help him lower his pants. Moon pushes her outside because if she stays there watching him, he will never be able to do it. Anne simply waits outside, and a little while later, after returning to the bedroom, the protagonist asks how long he was asleep. Anne tells him that he slept for 3 full days. He is surprised because that is a very long time, but he still does not know how his injuries were treated. Anne explains that Princess Celicia personally summoned the royal physician's chief physician to treat him. That very night, all of the young master's injuries were completely healed. However, the excessive blood loss caused a lack of oxygen to his brain, weakening his body and keeping him asleep for all that time. Moon is surprised to learn that in the end, it was she who saved him, but he would like to know whether the princess said anything else. Anne replies that she did not, leaving him somewhat relieved because, apparently, she has no intention of investigating the matter any further. Anne pauses to think for a moment and then remembers that the princess did say something to the king. Moon nearly falls back into a coma after hearing that. His maid continues by explaining that after the investigation, they discovered that the princess had been the true target of the assassins, and that those responsible belonged to the black market that had operated in Belrand for years. The king was furious, and the following day sent troops to destroy the market, capturing and executing many of its members. On the other hand, the Duke managed to capture 2 of the disguised assassins that same night, and they confessed everything during the interrogation. Since the incident happened inside the Duke's mansion, they were technically responsible as well. Before entering the palace, the Duke had already prepared himself to face His Majesty's wrath. However, he returned around noon the next day, and not only was he not punished, but when His Majesty ordered an investigation into the nobility, the Campbell family was the only one that did not have to be investigated, as though they were the only family the king truly trusted. That was probably thanks to the princess, since she must have spoken to her father and defended the protagonist's family because of everything he had done for her. Moon sighs in relief once again because he had been badly frightened and asks his maid that next time she should tell him everything at once because this young master already has a very weak heart. Anne becomes curious about his reaction and asks why he became so nervous, because the only reason he would react that way would be if something inappropriate had happened between him and Her Highness while they were alone together. Moon has no idea how to answer and remembers everything that happened. He quickly tries to change the subject by asking how something like that could possibly happen, because he may be a bad person, but he's not foolish enough to do anything against the princess. Who would dare commit such an act? It would be grounds for immediate execution. However, Anne does not seem convinced by that explanation. The young master asks what she is thinking, but Anne simply says that everything is fine and that it is now time for him to take his medicine because he no longer has a fever. As soon as he tastes the first spoonful, He immediately notices the incredibly awful flavor and asks what kind of medicine that is, because it is unbelievably bitter and has made his entire tongue feel strange. Anne explains that it is not actually medicine, but rather a supplement meant to replenish the young master's blood. Since she knows he dislikes bitter things, she added a little sugar, so he just needs to be a good young master and open his mouth. Moon thinks that this is no longer a matter of being good or bad, but rather his body's automatic rejection of such a terrible taste. The other maids, who have been peeking through the doorway, whisper that the young master is in a bad mood again and become frightened because he seems so irritated. He hates bitter food so much that whenever he tasted anything like it, he would become furious and whip people. One of them remarks that Noel had said the young master had become much kinder lately, but apparently even Anne was about to receive a few lashes. Noel, also somewhat worried, thinks they should immediately inform the lady of the house, but the protagonist tells them that they are forbidden from doing so because they must not tell his mother about this. Since it is only a matter of taking that ridiculous medicine, he grabs the entire bowl and gulps it down in one go. The three maids are startled and quickly close the door, but Moon immediately starts feeling sick and develops a severe headache. Anne apologizes because she forgot to explain that drinking the medicine all at once causes nausea, which is why it is supposed to be taken little by little. After he finishes taking all of it, Anne tells him that this was the fourth dose, and that the doctor said the young master would make a full recovery after just 2 more doses. However, the only thing that worries him is the unfortunate fact that he still has to drink 2 more doses of that horrible concoction. No longer seeing any meaning in life, he complains that the medicine is so bitter that it is worse than his own fate. Therefore, he no longer wants to keep fighting, and the world might as well end already. Anne tells him that there are still a few hours left before dinner, and that if he becomes hungry, she can serve him some black tea and a pachichi cake. If that is not enough, he only needs to call her at any time because she will ask Noel to wait outside his room. The protagonist thinks that she has worked incredibly hard over the past few days. So later, when he speaks with his mother, he will ask her to give Anne a raise. Anne says that she will let his parents know that he is awake, so they will not worry anymore. As he enjoys the cake, she adds that there is one more thing. That morning, a letter from the royal palace had arrived for him, and she left it on the desk beside his bed. Whenever he has time, he should take a look at it. Before she leaves, he asks her to wait because he has one more question. With cakes like those, he could easily eat 10 without even noticing. But how did she manage to make him swallow that bitter medicine every single time? Anne simply remains silent. Moon explains that he is not complaining, only curious, because there were no feeding tubes or medical equipment there. So how exactly did she force him to drink it? Anne says that it happened exactly the way he is imagining. Knowing that he could never endure something so bitter, she filled her own mouth with plenty of sugar and the rest was history. He does not understand immediately, but after thinking about what she said, he is stunned because what really happened was that she transferred the medicine directly into his mouth. Moon cannot understand how the previous owner of this body had been such an unbelievable idiot because he had an incredibly powerful father and a beautiful mother, not to mention that he himself was handsome and had a maid who adored him, making him perfectly capable of living as an ideal young master. So why could he not simply stop provoking poor Ariel? Then again, since Anne had passed the medicine to him mouth to mouth, that should have been his first kiss. However, he remembers that in reality, his first kiss had already happened. Moon quickly runs to read the letter that had arrived for him. Written inside are the words, "Very well. I will grant you one favor and consider you half a man, Moon Campbell." The protagonist feels relieved because, at least for the time being, the princess has no intention of making him pay for his sins, and he has managed to avoid the worst possible ending. That evening, during dinner, Noyce cries with happiness upon seeing that her son has finally awakened, because she had been terrified when his father carried him in his arms, covered in blood. She could not even think about what to do, because if something more serious had happened to him, she would not have been able to continue living either. Moon tries to calm his mother down, saying that he is fine and perfectly alive, so she does not need to cry so much. Noyce continues crying and asks how he can say that he is perfectly fine. She tells her son to look at himself in the mirror because before he had been perfect without a single blemish. And now he has that horrible scar, which breaks her heart. However, the protagonist continues trying to reassure her and says that it is only a scratch, so she does not need to worry so much. Aside from feeling a little weak, he is already almost fully recovered. Duke Lon agrees with his son, saying that it is merely a small injury and that having one more scar makes no difference, since scars are the medals of men who never fled from their battles. This time, thanks to Moon risking his life to save the princess, they were spared. Otherwise, no matter how many military achievements he possessed, Nothing would have calmed His Majesty the King's fury. The protagonist tries to speak about what happened, but his father interrupts him, explaining that 3 assassins were involved in the attack against the princess. Besides the one the princess herself managed to eliminate, there was another who broke through the mansion's defenses, and a third hidden in the sewers responsible for logistics. He captured the 2 survivors and took them directly to the palace. They did not make the interrogation easy in the slightest, but they managed to find some important clues among their belongings. They discovered that the women were not professional mercenaries, but bounty hunters from Belran's black market and worshippers of a dark god called the Fallen King. Moon is surprised by that, although it does make some sense because original stories have their limitations. The original text had not even mentioned that faction, and it was probably just an organization of little importance to the plot. The Duke continues explaining that, according to information from the Royal Guard, that group was a criminal organization that had committed every kind of crime for years. If the price was high enough, its members would even agree to eliminate their own parents. Without a doubt, they were a group of merciless psychopaths. However, he emphasizes that the protagonist no longer needs to worry about them, because he personally wiped out that despicable organization over the past few days. Moon is shocked to learn that his father eliminated all of them without leaving a single survivor. His mother says that it was obvious because apparently her son had forgotten that his father was the kingdom's foremost Grand Duke, an undefeated conqueror in countless wars. Those assassins injured the beloved son of a great monster, so of course that monster would not leave any of them alive. Lon tells him not to pay too much attention to his mother's exaggerations because he merely followed orders to eliminate the problems within the capital, nothing more. Moon thinks that such a result was to be expected from his father. However, he would like to know who hired those people, but the Duke explains that unfortunately they were unable to obtain that information because all the captured members of the bounty hunter group were under a curse. Whenever they spoke about the person responsible, they immediately burst into flames. That was why His Majesty became so furious. Afterward, the entire black market was destroyed, but they still could not find any concrete clues. This proved that whoever was behind the attack controlled the capital's underground networks and possessed enormous power. For that reason, His Majesty ordered an investigation into every noble family, since no one other than the nobles had any reason to attack the princess, especially the princes or certain dukes and marquises. Moon realizes that the entire black market was destroyed by his father, and this reminds him that in the original story, everything began when someone placed a bounty on the life of the king's favorite consort within the black market. Not only did they find an assassin, but the attack was also successful. Because of that, the king became so furious that he sent the royal knights to completely eradicate Belran's underworld. The assault lasted 3 months and was so violent that the capital's sewers turned red, causing the event to become known as the Blood River Tragedy. However, that was only supposed to happen 2 years from now. If the black market has already been destroyed, the royal consort will not die, and if she survives, the true Blood River will never happen. In the original story, that event was extremely important to Fungaochin's development. Ariel, who had been attending an illegal auction, became caught in the conflict between the royal knights and the underworld. Although she nearly died several times because she was the protagonist, she managed to escape every danger, and her power increased greatly as well. It could be said that the Blood River incident marked her transition from the student phase to becoming the savior of the world, but now, he had merely given Noel 2 days off to recover from her fever, yet the effect caused by that decision was enormous. Now everything had been turned upside down. The original story had been completely ruined, without any possibility of returning to its intended course. During the night, even though his parents and everyone else told him to rest properly, he believes that this is not the time for that. The story has already deviated completely from its original path, which means that everything happening from that point onward will be entirely unknown to him. He can no longer rely on the original script, and if he wants to survive, he will have to depend entirely on himself. Therefore, he needs to think carefully and establish a few small goals. He writes in his book that he must survive, avoid the ending involving imprisonment and punishment, grow stronger, and never trust the Black Book. He thinks about it for a moment, and although the voice of that idiotic assassin did not resemble anyone he had met so far, he could not dismiss the possibility of being captured and tortured to death. However, no matter how hard he tries, he cannot think of anything at all because he lacks sufficient information. With only those scattered fragments from his dream, he cannot formulate any reasonable explanation. Exhausted from thinking so much, he decides it would be better to forget about that for now and focus on his smaller goals and what he can actually do at the moment. Because of that, becoming stronger is his #1 priority. As the son of a duke, he has access to every resource necessary to strengthen himself. But all those methods are far too ordinary and not enough to allow him to approach the heroine's group from the story. The previous owner of that body was a complete idiot who wasted far too much time. He had studied for an entire year at St. Maria Magic Academy, and the only spell he learned was an illumination spell. Fortunately, the physical condition of that body was not too poor since he was the son of an extremely powerful duke. Even so, he could barely reach the end of the first stage. According to the level system taught at the academy, warriors, mages, and priests each had 5 levels, while whatever came afterward was still far beyond his reach. Even if he trained himself to death and reached level 5, it would barely make any difference. Ariel and Cilicia were chosen by the gods of that world, and those chosen by the gods did not follow any of the 3 traditional classes. They were essentially living cheats who broke every rule. The princess, for example, received immense power from the goddess of ice and snow the moment she was born. Since childhood, she had been able to control ice naturally. It was an innate ability, unlike priests who needed to pray, perform sacrifices, or form contracts to obtain divine power. Then there was Ariel, the queen of Feng Aotianism. If he was not mistaken by the end of the story, she possessed more than 10 blessings from different gods. She was connected to all kinds of deities, and whenever she could not defeat someone, she only needed to shake her little bell for a god to come help her, like a female version of the Monkey King. And that was not even referring to the future Ariel. At that moment, she already possessed physical strength similar to his own, while also knowing how to use magic, carrying divine blessings, and possessing an arsenal of extremely rare items. Against an average mage or warrior, she could defeat opponents up to 2 levels above her without even breaking a sweat. Therefore, he, who was nothing more than a plucked chicken, would not stand the slightest chance in a direct fight against her. Considering all those facts, the conclusion was obvious. For the time being, his primary goal was to reach a level at which he could at least defend himself against Ariel as quickly as possible. Even though she possessed that absurd protagonist advantage, it did not mean that he lacked his own hidden cards. After the assassin's attack, he had even awakened a new ability. By snapping his fingers, he could summon the Black Book, but the object ends up striking a rather sensitive part of his body. He grabs the book and shouts that it hurt badly and that if the book wanted to eliminate him, there was no need to attack his little friend down below. Suddenly, the book begins flipping through its pages rapidly. It stops on a random page where everything Moon had done up to that point was summarized. From the moment he slipped past the guards to enter the black market to the moment he memorized the coming-of-age ceremony speech and danced with the princess. The protagonist is surprised to see that everything has been recorded, but he thinks it is far too detailed and almost resembles a story meant for readers over the age of 18. Furthermore, he has become the main character of the story told within that book. He also notices that some letters are written in red, which means that something is about to happen. Those words stated that later, the completely unprepared protagonist would open the door to his own room, and the two of them would be attacked by an assassin who had infiltrated the mansion. He begins to be pulled into the book once again, and as soon as he is teleported, he tries to understand where he is. Even with the dim lighting, he can still see his surroundings. This is not the same dungeon as before, and perhaps it is the space inside the black book. Suddenly, he hears someone approaching and looks over in alarm, asking who is there. But the assassin from before simply attacks him and kills him instantly. He returns to the real world in shock, realizing that he was defeated with a single strike, but he cannot understand how that woman managed to appear inside the black book. The book begins flipping through its pages again and stops on the experience and skills page. Currently, both his warrior and mage classes are at the first stage. The progress of his abilities is also underway. His dagger combat technique is at level 0, but it has increased by 1%, while Shadow Step, which is also at level 0, has increased by 0.5%. With a smile on his face, he finally understands. Apparently, this is the Black Book's true ability. He apologizes for what he said earlier and thinks that if he performs a few tests and his assumption is correct, this cheat-like ability will be brutally powerful. A short while later, he collapses onto the bed in exhaustion and realizes that the flow of time is the same. This time, he managed to endure for only 3 seconds. To verify whether his theory is correct, he decides to check the skill experience once again. His warrior and mage levels remain unchanged, but the cleric class has also appeared, although it is still completely at 0. His 2 abilities, on the other hand, have increased slightly again. It is exactly what he expected. The abilities used by enemies are recorded by the Black Book, and he can gain experience by fighting their shadows within the illusory world. This means that he can obtain every ability he witnesses for free without even needing to pay for lessons. The Shadow Step, used by the assassin, and her elegant combat technique will soon belong to him. With such a powerful trick, how could he possibly fail to defeat the heroine? Just when Moon was thinking that he needed to do something about his lack of power, this ability appeared. Apparently, this young master will not die so easily this time. Even though he still does not know exactly how skill mastery increases, the important thing is to keep training. He enters the illusory subspace countless times but continues to be killed almost immediately. Anne goes to his room because it is time for him to take his medicine, but as soon as she enters, she notices that he is wrapped in a blanket. She smiles because even though the young master has grown so much, whenever he sleeps alone, he still looks exactly the same as he did when he was little, and she finds it very adorable. Since he has only just fallen asleep, she decides not to disturb him and places the medicine on the bedside table. As soon as she leaves, Moon remains beneath the blanket, trembling in pain because that damned illusory shadow had kicked him in his private parts. That was unacceptable because she was clearly far stronger than him, yet she was still fighting far too dishonestly. However, he refuses to leave things that way and enters the subspace once again. By the following morning, Moon is completely exhausted. On his 185th attempt, he finally managed to last 30 seconds against that woman. Suddenly, he feels an intense pain throughout his body and accidentally knocks over the medicine. After enduring that terrifying pain for several seconds, he takes a deep breath as he finally begins to recover. Even though he cannot truly die inside the illusion, the pain caused by death is still very real. At first, he wanted to discover whether he could exploit some kind of loophole by repeatedly entering the illusory world to avoid the consequences of death. But now he realizes that it does not work that way. The accumulated pain of nearly 200 deaths was so intense that he almost died for real. However, now that he is feeling a little better, it is finally time to examine the results of his hard work throughout the night. His dagger combat technique has risen to level 2 and is already at 35%. However, Shadow Step is still at level 0, although it has increased to 11%. Moon feels proud of himself after realizing that he has made significant progress, even though he only possesses 1 or 2 levels and is still far below that assassin. Now that he has mastered the basics, the rest should become somewhat easier. He walks toward the wall of his room because he can no longer wait and needs to discover how the technique works in the real world. Upon using Shadow Step, he rapidly moves from one side to the other and becomes excited by the sensation, but the pain in his foot is terrifying. He rolls around on the floor because no one warned him that using the technique would make his feet hurt so badly. Furthermore, he cannot understand how the assassin managed to fight the princess without showing any signs of pain when it is so unbearable. None of it makes any sense to him. However, he realizes that the truth is simply that his level is far too low, and that the technique is not something a novice warrior can learn. He remembers that, according to what he learned at the academy, martial techniques needed to be combined with battle energy and could only be properly mastered by a second-level warrior. This means that he is still far too weak, and because of that, he needs to adjust his future plans. Therefore, the first step is to find a master. St. Maria Academy, which he attends, will resume classes soon. However, from what he remembers, most of the instructors there are mages, and he cannot recall a single truly powerful warrior at the academy. The situation is becoming increasingly complicated because magic is extremely useful in that world, so almost no one trains in martial arts. Even though he has money, he will probably have difficulty finding a master who is truly skilled in that field. However, he remembers that when it comes to the most famous and powerful warrior in history, the man capable of facing 1,000 enemies alone, the strongest person in the world, known as the Heart of Warriors, is already inside his own home. When discussing the most powerful and renowned warrior of the past century, only one name can be mentioned. At the age of 15, he was already serving as the personal guard of the crown prince at the time. At 20, he led the royal guard in suppressing rebellions and securing the stability of the throne during the new king's coronation. At 25, as the empire's military commander, he defended the borders in battles that shook the continent, terrifying neighboring kingdoms and demons for 20 years. At 32, he received the title of Lionheart, becoming the only duke in history to earn that position solely through military achievements. That giant who had never known defeat, who crushed kingdoms, demons, rebels, and even stray dogs that dared to challenge the empire, that titan who seemed to have descended from the heavens, was his own father. The protagonist cannot understand how the previous owner of that body, despite carrying such a magnificent legacy on his shoulders, managed to meet such a pathetic end. This means that he does not need St. Maria Academy, much less any other master. From that day onward, he will become antisocial, and his father will personally train him. The matter is already decided. Anne knocks from outside the door and asks whether her young master has awakened. Moon asks whether something happened, but she says that his father is looking for him. Moon thinks that the timing is perfect because he really needed to speak with his father. He places his hands on her shoulders, surprising the other maids slightly. They apologize and address Anne as the head maid. Anne says that it does not matter and asks them to simply continue with their work. Moon is impressed to discover that she has been promoted. Anne explains that the previous head maid resigned, taking responsibility for what happened, and shortly after the young master awakened, the master appointed her as the new head maid. However, the protagonist becomes somewhat upset by the situation because the former head maid resigned to assume full responsibility for what happened, since the assassination attempt came from inside the mansion and the intruders had disguised themselves as maids. However, the truth was that he was the one who needed to apologize because everything happened only because he gave the order for her to hire outsiders. He remembers that his father once told him that the head maid had been by his side since he was very young. Although they were master and servant, their relationship was actually much deeper, resembling that of siblings or even a mother and son. Now that she had left, his father must have been deeply saddened. Anne tells the young master that he does not need to apologize because none of it was his fault. Furthermore, the head maid merely resigned from her administrative position but did not leave the family, and he would understand that later. As soon as he meets his parents, Noyce hugs him tightly because she is overjoyed to see that he has fully recovered. She pushes his head downward and tells him to stay still so he can feel it as well. Moon realizes that his mother pressed his head against her belly and asked him to feel, so he asks whether it is exactly what he is thinking. Noyce says yes, because soon he will have a little sister, or a little brother. The protagonist becomes excited by the news and asks whether she is serious. His mother explains that lately she has been feeling somewhat heavy and that, the last time, while he was recovering, Lon asked the doctor to examine her. That was how they discovered that she really was pregnant. Moon is overjoyed to learn that he will become an older brother and says that it is amazing. His mother asks whether he would prefer a little brother or a little sister, but the protagonist says that it does not matter because he will love them equally. Duke Lon simply watches the two of them talking and feels deeply fulfilled. Noyce, also happy about the news, laughs and says that she already knew it because she had been telling his father that the protagonist was the best and would love his little brother or little sister equally. Lon asks the two of them to calm down a little and tells his wife that their eldest son has only just recovered from very serious injuries, while the younger child is also extremely fragile, so she should not get too excited. Furthermore, he needs the protagonist to sit down because they must discuss something serious. As soon as he hears the news, Moon is shocked and asks whether his father is truly returning to the front lines. Lon says yes because he will leave for the front that afternoon. Considering that classes in the capital will begin in 1 month, only his mother will remain there. Therefore, she and the maids will travel with him that afternoon to the Campbell territory, where she can rest throughout her pregnancy. Lon looks at Faye, the family's former headmaid, and says that he will entrust Noyce's safety to her while he is away. She tells him not to worry because she will do everything in her power to keep the lady safe. The protagonist, still trying to understand the situation, asks his father whether he truly cannot remain because there must be other generals in the Empire capable of commanding the troops, so he does not need to go personally. The Duke explains that the situation is urgent, leaving him no choice. After more than 10 years, the damned demons from the depths of the western border are showing signs of activity, and this time, he believes he will have to remain at the border for at least 3 years. Upon hearing that, the protagonist remembers that the original story mentioned that exact arc. At first, the demon invasion was merely a strategy, a diversion meant to confuse the human world, all to prepare for the plan that would be carried out 3 years later. That decisive moment, 3 years in the future, corresponded precisely to the beginning of the heroine's salvation arc. However, his greatest problem was that his father would be away for 3 years, meaning that all of his plans were completely ruined. He shouts toward God that everything is over and that all of his plans have gone down the drain. Before leaving for his new mission, Lon says goodbye to his wife and asks her to stop crying so much because it will not be good for the little Campbell inside her. Noyce is sad for 2 reasons. The first is that her husband will be away for 3 years, and the second is that she will have to wait until the holidays to see her son again because she will remain in the territory due to her pregnancy. Before leaving, Lon looks at his son and says that the fact that he risked his own life to save the princess from those criminals proves that courage runs through his veins and that, without a doubt, he is a true Campbell. The protagonist tries to speak, but his father interrupts him, asking him to wait, and continues by saying that, as men of the Campbell family, protecting their home and defending the nation is not merely a duty, but also the responsibility that comes with belonging to one of the Empire's 4 great ducal houses. He asks his son to look at the insignia embedded in the chest of his armor. That is the family emblem. The sword has always been there, representing the sword of His Majesty the King, while the evil dragon beneath it symbolizes every enemy of the Empire. This means that he is currently the Empire's sharpest blade, and the day will come when the men of the Campbell family must face the battlefield themselves. Perhaps Moon will inherit that sword from his father, or perhaps he will find his own path. However, that is not the most important thing. What he truly means is that his son has already become a man with the character expected of a true man, and, unlike the youth his father once had, the protagonist possesses every resource the Duke prepared for him. Therefore, whatever he wishes to do, he only needs to dedicate himself fully and accomplish his goals. Moon is moved by his father's words, but the Duke says that now they need to discuss what truly matters. He asks what his son thinks of Anne. The protagonist says that she is very good, but he does not understand his father's question. Lon then asks whether the protagonist likes her. Moon replies that if the question is whether he likes her or not, then of course he does. His father explains that he watched the girl grow up from a young age, that she comes from a highly respectable family, and that she is intelligent. However, most importantly, the feelings she has for the protagonist go far beyond the simple loyalty of a maid. Therefore, if he likes her, he should act quickly. Moon is surprised and asks whether his father is truly saying that he should marry Anne. The Duke says that is exactly what he means because the main reason the family has so few members is that he and the protagonist's mother are almost never together due to all of his work, and now, once again, he must return to the front lines. Moon feels somewhat lost because he still has his engagement agreement with Princess Cilicia. However, his father explains that he does not need to worry about that because it was merely an empty promise from the Emperor. His true intention was to use the Campbell family as support for the princess and balance the power behind the crown prince. Even if the princess eventually marries the protagonist, they will simply make her the principal wife, which means that it does not matter whether he marries a princess, a maid, or even a girl living on the streets. What he truly wants is to have a grandson waiting for him when he returns in 3 years, and that is non-negotiable because it is a direct order from the head of the family. As soon as his father leaves, Anne approaches the protagonist and says that she accidentally overheard the young master and the lord mention her name during their conversation, so she would like to know whether there is anything she needs to do. He thinks that it is nothing he cannot tell her, so with a smile on his face, he says that being a maid is merely the role she holds at that moment, but in the end, everyone will follow their own life and their own path. Furthermore, she is the finest maid in that family, and an incredible woman like her will certainly find a wonderful man in the future, not someone useless like him. If she ever falls in love with someone, he would very much like to know who it is, because he will make sure that she can leave with that person. He will also prepare an incredible dowry for her, and no one in her future husband's family will dare look down on someone who came from House Campbell. Therefore, she must pursue her happiness courageously and never give up because he, as her young master, and the entire Campbell family will be the strongest support she could ever have. After hearing all of that, she is left speechless. The protagonist thinks that he is truly amazing because he did not read so many stories over all those years for nothing, and as such an understanding young master, she must surely be so moved that she is about to cry. However, her behavior is the complete opposite. She begins trembling at the thought of leaving the house, and because of the words he said about allowing her to go. It makes her so furious that she clenches her hand hard enough to injure herself slightly. Apparently, her young master really has changed, so she can no longer wait and will have to act that very night. Late that night, inside the mansion's library, Moon reads several books and thinks that, in the end, his plans changed faster than the wind. Even so, his priority remains becoming stronger. If his father is not present, he will study on his own. It is no surprise that his father is the Grand Duke who rose from nothing solely through military achievement. Although there are not many books on martial techniques available there, the ones brought from the Imperial Library are more than enough. For the time being, it would be better not to return to the academy because interacting with the heroines group under those circumstances would be far too dangerous. Therefore, the following day he will ask Anne to arrange a temporary leave of absence. He will study the martial arts manuals and then use the Black Book's simulation space to fight assassins and gain experience. In that manner, he will remain at home until he manages to defeat that shadow woman. For now, that is his grand plan. He had only skimmed through the book, so he needed to review everything once again. When he looks at the Black Book, he sees that techniques for picking locks with fish bones, basic physical conditioning exercises for Imperial soldiers, a fundamental tutorial on bodily flexibility for martial artists, and even techniques for striking the vital points of the human body have all been recorded within it. With that, he confirms what he had been thinking. He does not need to memorize everything, because simply holding a book and looking at its title is enough for the Black Book to record all of its contents automatically. That function truly is incredible. He apologizes to the book for calling it useless before, saying that the whole thing had merely been a misunderstanding. Anne enters the library and asks whether he is still reading. The protagonist asks whether she brought something for dinner. She serves the food, and the protagonist says that, with all the personnel his father took with him, only she, Noel, and 3 other maids remain to take care of that enormous mansion and him. So he is truly grateful to all of them. Anne says that it is merely her duty. Furthermore, Count Lac sent over that reserve wine, and it is said that his vineyard produces only 100 bottles a year. On the market, it has already reached the astronomical price of 200,000. Moon thinks that drinking it is not a good idea because he still needs to study a little longer and would rather not end up falling asleep on top of his books. Anne becomes extremely angry and nearly breaks the bottle of wine, but she restrains herself and asks what the young master would like to drink instead. Moon thinks coffee would be perfect for keeping him awake a little longer. She apologizes and pours him some tea, explaining that, due to certain circumstances, the only beverages available that night are red wine and black tea. He becomes thoughtful because the conversation feels far too familiar. Anne hands him the cup of tea and says that, due to the carelessness of a certain maid, rats gnawed through and devoured part of the stored coffee beans. New ones will only arrive the following day, so she is certain that the young master would not wish to drink coffee contaminated by rats. He agrees and says there is nothing else to be done, so the black tea will at least have to help clear his mind a little. As soon as he takes a sip, he immediately realizes that something is wrong. He begins losing consciousness and asks why she betrayed him. Anne catches her young master's body and says that he does not need to worry because she would never betray him. As he loses consciousness, she says that her heart is broken at that moment because she has always loved him deeply. So how could he say those words to her? That meant he truly had changed, and therefore she could only purify him with her own love. That way, they would remain together until the end of the world. When he wakes up, Moon realizes that he is in that place and that the prophecy is coming true. In the end, she was the person he had seen in his dreams. Anne is impressed and says that the black market merchant truly had not deceived her because the medicine worked extremely well. The protagonist asks what she's trying to do, but she cannot understand how he still has not realized what she truly wants. Anne explains that 10 years earlier, when the young master was only 8 years old, she came to stay by his side, and ever since then she has lived solely for him. Therefore, she belongs only to him. For that reason, the young master also belongs only to her. What she is about to do is simply bring him back onto the correct path because he has begun straying from it. Moon, still completely confused, asks what she is talking about because he does not understand anything about this so-called correct path she keeps mentioning. He asks her to discuss it with him more calmly. Anne simply tells him to be quiet because it is already too late. The young master does not need to do anything and only has to leave everything in her hands. After that night, from head to toe, inside and out, his flesh and even his soul, every scent, every strand of hair, and every drop of blood would all belong to her. Sometime later, Moon is completely exhausted and wonders whether everything has truly ended this time because he lost count after the 10th time it happened, and his mind is already confused. He never imagined that his 30 years as a virgin would end in such a manner. Furthermore, he never imagined that the same person who had turned the protagonist into an idiot and who, according to the prophecy, would still make him suffer for 1,000 nights had been Anne all along. In the end, even though he had already prepared himself mentally, it still hurt a little. He remembers telling her that she did not need to keep forcing him because if she removed the restraints, he could cooperate. However, she told him to be quiet because, compared to the long 10 years she had waited, that pain was nothing. Throughout all those years, she protected him and took care of him. She turned him into an ignorant, arrogant man and a despicable, lazy fool whom everyone feared and avoided. For 10 years, she worked without rest so that he would belong only to her, all for the sake of reaching that moment. Therefore, he needed to understand that no matter what he said, she would not allow him to leave that night under any circumstances. He never imagined that the most beautiful, gentle, and trustworthy maid of them all was not only an obsessed madwoman, but also the mastermind behind the protagonist's corruption. Even though the previous night had been pleasurable, according to the Black Book's prophecy, he would eventually die at her hands. Now that he had managed to avoid exile, he could not die in such a ridiculous way, so he needed to find a way to escape. He tries to free himself, but she awakens and asks what he's trying to do. Moon explains that his wrists were merely hurting a little, and that he wanted to move. Anne becomes upset because it is already noon, and even though it pains her to separate from him, she still needs to take care of the mansion's affairs, otherwise the others will begin to suspect something. Now that the young master finally belongs completely to her, perhaps she could eliminate everyone in the mansion. The protagonist becomes furious upon hearing that and says that he will never allow such a thing. Anne looks at him and asks whether that means there is another maid in the mansion, whom the young master still likes besides her, perhaps Noel. However, he says that is not what he means, and asks her to stop inventing such things. Anne merely laughs, saying that she was joking and that he does not need to become so nervous. As long as he obeys her, there will be no need to hurt anyone in the mansion. He asks whether that means she can remove the restraints because she is always saying that she loves him, so why does she want to keep him that way forever? Anne snaps her fingers and says that of course she will release him, but he needs to know that he cannot do anything foolish because the room is completely isolated. Its structure is reinforced with steel and its lock was created by a master craftsman. Furthermore, there is only one key. It took her a great deal of time and effort to build that hiding place directly beneath the Duke's nose. He asks whether no one will become suspicious of his sudden disappearance, but she explains that she already told everyone that because the Lord and Lady had traveled away, the young master returned to the academy early because he felt lonely. The maids will not question anything. Therefore, he can relax because no one will discover that he is there. She herself will bring him the 3 daily meals he needs, and nothing has changed. It is true that he now belongs entirely to her, but she remains the same maid as always. She touches him and is impressed to realize that he has already recovered, although that was to be expected of her beloved young master. Even though she would love to continue what they started the previous night, unfortunately, she needs to leave at that moment. While she is away, he should be a good boy and get plenty of rest. He asks her to at least return his clothes, but Anne simply ignores him and closes the door. He becomes thoughtful because he had previously imagined 1,000 possibilities regarding the identity of the shadowy figure from the prophecy, and perhaps now he is doomed to spend the rest of his days there as that woman's property. Even though the previous night had been enjoyable, if it continued happening more than 10 times each night, even if he escaped the prophecy, he would still die of exhaustion. However, the most important thing was his freedom. What good would it be to remain alive if he could not be free? It would be no different from being dead. He gets out of bed thinking that he needs to try and attempts to open the door in several different ways, but he cannot move it even a single inch. Even the walls behind the stone are made of solid steel. For a moment, he had thought that with the black book functioning like a true cheat, he could change his fate, but in the end, things still turned out the same. The book appears, and the protagonist says that he was not calling it because this was not the time for games. The mind manipulation techniques Anne used were not conventional magic. It was obvious that she was one of the gods chosen on the same level as the princess. Even if he entered the training space at that moment and practiced like a madman, it would already be too late. However, the book continues hovering beside him. Moon decides to set everything aside and train anyway. Even if he is killed several times in that space, at least it is better than remaining in that suffocating place. However, when he opens the book, he realizes that all the books he had read the previous night contained the formula for victory. Moon does 200 push-ups and thinks that is not bad at all. At the very least, the physical condition of that body is still somewhat decent. The Black Book's training space only improves techniques and can even damage the mind. So to strengthen his body, he has no choice but to use primitive methods like that. Furthermore, the princess was already like that, and now his maid was as well, so he needed to become stronger to prevent anyone from dominating him again. At that exact moment, Anne enters with his food, saying that she is happy to see him with so much energy. He is surprised to realize that she has already returned. Anne thinks that what she just said sounds like something a wife would say while waiting for her husband after a day of work, and she finds it very cute. She prepared a meal and filled the bathtub with water at the temperature he likes. The protagonist becomes excited because it has already been 2 days since he last took a bath. She asks what he would prefer, taking a bath first and then eating dinner, or playing a little more violently. Without thinking twice, he chooses the bath and rushes toward the tub. Anne notices that the protagonist is acting somewhat strangely and asks whether the water is not at the right temperature, but he explains that this is not the issue because he is no longer a child and knows how to bathe by himself. Anne tries to tease him a little, asking whether he already hates her after only one night. Moon explains that this is not the case, and that he merely finds the situation somewhat strange. His maid is pleased to hear that because now that the young master belongs entirely to her, washing every inch of his body is her duty as his guardian. Whatever he wants, he only needs to ask, because he no longer has to restrain himself. Moon says that it is not exactly what she is thinking, but merely a normal reaction from a man's body. He thinks that his little friend needs to endure and not allow that woman to dominate him again. She decides that perhaps it would be better to stop bothering him for the time being, and since he insists so strongly on bathing by himself, she will at least feed him. The protagonist agrees and begins eating, thinking that the food is delicious. Even when his parents were there, he had never eaten meat as good as this, because it was tender and firm at the same time. More precisely, it did not contain those common fibrous parts found in ordinary meat. Anne is delighted that he quickly recognizes it as beef and explains that those ingredients had actually always been available, but she thought he would not like them, so she only used them to make broth. Moon becomes curious and asks which part of the bull she used. Anne says that only males possess it, and that there is only one in each animal. He cannot believe that he has been eating that particular part, but she explains that it belongs to a specific type of bull known for being extremely powerful in that area. It is said that when the males enter their mating season and cannot find partners, the surroundings are covered in holes in the trees by morning, which is why they are called holy hole bulls. Moon begins to feel sick after hearing the entire story, but his maid continues explaining that besides that part of the bull, the meal also contains parts from tigers, goblins, and trolls. If dragons were not so rare throughout the empire, their parts would be the finest of all. The protagonist, now extremely irritated, asks her to stop and demands to know how anyone could eat that kind of food. She reveals that she has been adding those ingredients to his meals for some time, and that, judging by his current condition, her strategy has worked extremely well. Moon stands up, furious with everything, because he can no longer tolerate being treated that way, but she becomes enchanted by the intensity of his anger. The protagonist continues arguing with her, saying that she already keeps him locked inside that dark room and has now forced him to eat those things. But at that exact moment, he loses consciousness again. Anne thinks that a single drop was already enough. It is normal for him to become angry because she knows perfectly well how painful it is to lose one's freedom. But if the price of his freedom is losing him forever, then that is something she will never allow. Therefore, he can rest peacefully and leave everything in her hands. Several hours later, he regains consciousness. Anne notices that he is awake and explains that they went too far the previous night, so she became somewhat afraid that his body might become exhausted. This time, they only did it twice. However, she needs to know whether he is feeling any pain, but the protagonist simply ignores her and turns his face away. She realizes that he is still angry but decides to make a deal with him. Since he has been behaving very well, she promises to grant him one small wish. Moon only wants his freedom, but that is something she is unwilling to negotiate. So he asks for clothes instead, yet she refuses that as well. Moon tells her to shove that wish into a certain part of her body since he cannot ask for anything. She thinks for a moment and explains that he can choose what they will eat for lunch and dinner. The protagonist thinks that this cannot even be considered a wish, but at least it is something. His maid asks what he will decide. Moon remembers that autumn is approaching and that at that time of year he used to sail across the lake, admiring the autumn leaves while enjoying the count's wine and the fresh seasonal fish. Anne asks whether the young master misses the lake fish, but points out the place is extremely far away and sending someone there would be. The protagonist interrupts her and says that in the previous year he crossed that lake with pride, while now he is rotting inside that cell, merely waiting for death. And that is truly tragic. If he cannot even enjoy those fish anymore, then what is the point of continuing to live? It would be better to die than endure all of that. Even though Anne is completely insane, she is still deeply in love with him and is moved by the scene, saying that she understands. She promises to obtain the fish and do whatever is necessary so that the young master can taste the freshest fish from that lake. Moon thanks her, saying that she is the greatest maid in the entire world and that no one else compares to her. He also promises to give her plenty of encouragement and says that he will wait for her inside the house. Anne finally feels that her love is being returned and gives him a farewell kiss. The protagonist asks where she is going, and his maid explains that the lake is very far away but promises to return before noon. Until then, he only needs to wait patiently. Outside, she thinks that she barely managed to control herself. The young master is undoubtedly the most adorable man in the entire world, so she needs to obtain those fish as quickly as possible. That way, she will have more time to pamper him as he deserves. Moon celebrates the fact that she has finally left. Even though she exhausted him throughout the entire night, he has at least found an opportunity. He summons the Black Book and asks whether, besides that assassin, it can create other simulated training spaces as well. The book confirms that it can, and the protagonist thinks that this is perfect because, according to what he read earlier, he needs to create a training space containing 1,000 locks. He must master that divine technique before she returns. Near the lake, Anne is speaking with a man. He warns her that the lake is extremely dangerous, so she cannot approach it. Anne, somewhat confused, asks why. The man says that it is none of her business, orders her to leave, and tries to grab her hand. Anne becomes furious and pierces his hand because she hates anyone other than the young master touching her. That small wound was merely a warning. If the man interferes with her again, she will tear him into pieces and throw his remains into the lake to feed the fish. Now, he needs to explain in detail what is happening at the lake. The man, clutching his wounded hand, says that the woman is insane. But if she truly wishes to die, he will not try to stop her again because the lake spirit has awakened. The Adventurers Guild sent a team and confirmed that it is a dominant level magical beast. At present, a group of B-rank adventurers is carrying out an extermination mission, which is why the lake has been closed. Anne finally understands why the atmosphere around that place feels so strange. The man says that this is exactly the reason, but she needs to leave immediately. If she leaves only 300 emirs as compensation for the injury, he will not report her. But if she interferes with the adventures, she will regret it. Anne throws the money onto the ground in front of the man, but he becomes surprised and asks whether she still insists on going. That only proves how insane she is, because she knows that the place is dangerous and still intends to enter. So what exactly is making her so obsessed? Anne emphasizes that the reason is very simple. She is doing it for her love. Among the group of adventurers, a woman thinks that if things continue that way, she will lose her chance. Therefore, once everything is over, she will need to confess all of her feelings to him. She is Urka, a member of the group attempting to confront that monster. Another member of the group shouts, asking what she is thinking about because they need healing magic and cannot endure much longer. Urka begins healing her companions, and after many spells, the monster finally emerges from the water. Rode notices the attack and steps forward to block it with his defensive magic. He then asks Urka to immediately use her offensive magic. While she is casting her spell, the other woman in the group attacks first with explosive magic, striking the monster directly in the mouth. Rode seizes the opportunity, charges toward the creature, delivers a precise attack, and ends the battle, thanking Tia for acting so effectively. She asks whether he is injured. Rode emphasizes that he is perfectly fine and that it was thanks to her quick actions and assistance that he managed to destroy the monster. While the two continue talking, Urka feels ignored and abandoned, unable to understand why. She and Rode were childhood friends and had promised that, when they grew up, they would become the strongest adventuring team. That way, they would always remain together. She had worked incredibly hard, training every day so that she could catch up to him, yet his eyes had never turned toward her. Urka was the first person to enter his life, the first to appear in his world. But in the end, she became nothing more than a supporting character, while he fell in love with someone else. She continues wondering why everything turned out that way. Rode calls her again and asks what she is thinking about this time, because they need help dismembering the monster. She simply swallows all those feelings and with a smile on her face says that she is coming. However, at that moment, an extremely loud noise echoes from within the lake. The water begins behaving strangely, and suddenly another monster appears. This time, it is the true lake spirit, far larger and stronger than the previous one. Tia once again attempts to use her explosive magic, but her attack is practically insignificant. The monster counterattacks, destroying everything around it. Urka rushes over to support Rode and asks whether he is alright. However, he says that the monster is beyond what they can handle, so she needs to move away immediately. Urka worries about leaving him alone and asks him to retreat as well. But Rode refuses because he was the one who brought Tia into the team, so he needs to make sure she remains safe. Even if the result is death, he will die beside her. At that moment, Urka dies inside as she watches the man she loves offer his own life to save another woman. Anne has been observing everything and prepares to attack, because if that is what they call a dominant level monster, then she might as well consider herself a goddess. Furthermore, obtaining an intimate part of a dragon for her beloved young master will not take much time. The monster attempts to attack again, but Anne manages to activate her protection before the strike reaches them, completely neutralizing it. Anne approaches Urka and asks whether she is alright. She says yes, but does not know who the person who just saved her is. Anne is pleased to hear that, but warns them to protect themselves because she will eliminate the monster immediately. She uses her cutting ability, and all the metal begins turning into liquid, piercing through the monster's body several times and trapping it in place. With the remaining metal, she creates a staircase and slowly walks toward the creature. Anne is extremely irritated because ever since she arrived, that filthy monster has not stopped screaming like a lunatic for even a single minute. Even the fish her young master wanted so badly fled in terror. For that crime, it will have to pay with its life. With a single attack, she defeats the monster. Rode cannot understand how a dominant class monster was eliminated so easily. Urka rushes over once again to see whether her beloved is alright. He says that he is, but Tia is badly injured, although he still has a healing potion. Furthermore, he would like to ask Urka for a favor. The identity of the woman who killed the monster is a mystery, so Urka needs to approach her and find out whether she is an adventurer and belongs to any group. If she does not, Urka should try to recruit her. Defeating a dominant monster with a single strike while possessing such incredible magic proves that, if she joined their group, they would become extremely powerful. That way, they would never be placed in such a dangerous situation again. Anne is holding several fish, trying to remember what happened the previous year. On that occasion, the fisherman himself prepared the fish from beginning to end, from cutting it to serving the dish, but she cannot remember which type the young master liked the most. She believes that this is an unforgivable mistake because she does not even know what her young master likes best, which makes her a terrible maid. Urka approaches and explains that the two fish she is holding are not edible. The scarlet red has tough flesh and a horrible smell, while the colorful one is poisonous. However, the two fish in front of her, on the left, are perfect and belong to a very famous species from the lake. Anne is surprised to discover that the girl knows so much about fish. Urka explains that her village is located on the opposite side of the lake and that every autumn she goes fishing for that species with her family. The nobles love the lake's fish, so they always fetch a good price. Anne seizes the opportunity and asks whether the young lady could teach her how to cook those fish. 10 minutes later, Anne has already written down every step and thanks her for the information, saying that it will be very useful. Urka thinks that she did not even need to thank her because, compared to saving everyone from the lake spirit, it was nothing. She apologizes for being so intrusive, but asks whether Anne came from so far away to fish for someone special. The maid says yes because her beloved wanted to eat those fish, so she came there to obtain them. Urka thinks that preparing something with so much care is incredibly special, so Anne's beloved must be a very fortunate man to have a partner like her. Anne thinks about what she did to her beloved and agrees, saying that he truly is very fortunate and that once the young master understands the full extent of her love, things will become easier. However, she ends the conversation by thanking Urka once again for her help, because she now needs to return and prepare the fish. Urka asks Anne to wait a moment because she has a small question about love and would like to ask someone as experienced as her. Anne explains that romantic problems are among the few situations in the world for which no answer is 100% correct. However, as thanks for teaching her how to cook, she will answer the question and do everything she can to help using all the experience she possesses. Urka attempts to invent a story so that it will not seem as though she is the one experiencing it, and says that she has a close friend who has been in love with someone for a very long time, but she does not know whether that person feels the same because he is extremely absent-minded and treats everyone with equal kindness. Anne thinks that man is the fireplace type, someone who spreads warmth to everyone. Urka agrees, thinking that the comparison is remarkably accurate. She continues by saying that her friend was already prepared to confess and reveal everything she felt, but suddenly, another woman appeared. Because of that, her friend has recently begun having doubts because that person treats the new woman better. Therefore, she thinks that perhaps she should give up on that unrequited love. After all, the two of them like each other, while she is merely the childhood friend. Anne understands all of her concerns and decides to get straight to the point, asking Urka how deeply she loves that man. Urka becomes embarrassed and attempts to say that it is only about a friend, but ultimately decides to tell the truth. She has truly loved that man since they were children, and she has carried that unrequited love for more than 10 years. Anne asks whether that love is so great that she would give her life for that man without a second thought. Urka answers yes without hesitation, saying that she would not merely give up her own life, but would do anything for him, even something the entire world would condemn. Anne thinks that little Urka already has her answer. If her love is that profound, why did she need to ask anyone else? Urka, still somewhat confused, asks what she means. Anne tells her to follow the purest desire within her heart, give everything for the person she loves, and above all, never choose to do or abandon something that she will deeply regret in the future. That is the only advice she can offer regarding the problem, and Urka will have to handle the rest on her own. Urka reflects on those words, and something ignites inside her, causing her intense pain. A voice asks whether she truly intends to give up, because she is capable of abandoning morality, the law, and even her own life, sacrificing everything for him. Therefore, the great question is whether she is truly willing to allow the two of them to be happy together. Urka refuses because that is impossible to accept. If Rode ended up with someone other than her, jealousy would destroy her from within, especially if that person were that worthless Tia who deserved to die. The voice says that it seems she has finally understood. Now, all she needs to do is follow the deepest desire living within her heart. She must conquer and seize what has always belonged to her, leave her mark upon him, and transform him into something that belongs to her alone. Urka knows perfectly well that Rode is extremely powerful, so she asks what she could possibly do. The voice says that it does not matter how powerful a man is. If she breaks all four of his limbs and places a collar around his neck, he will become an obedient little dog who knows nothing except how to bark. Therefore, she should not worry because she will receive all the power the voice has preserved, the great strength of absolute love. Rode asks whether Urka is all right and why she suddenly collapsed. Urka says that it was nothing and that Miss Anne had nothing to do with it because she merely ran out of energy from being so exhausted. Furthermore, she also asked what he requested, but Miss Anne is the maid of a noble family and cannot join their adventuring group. Rode thinks that it is a great shame. Moreover, she has already left, but he would have liked to thank her personally because if that woman had not appeared, they would probably all have been killed there. Tia notices something on Urka's chest and asks whether she is injured. Urka becomes slightly embarrassed and covers the mark, saying that it is merely a burn caused by the lake beast's electrical attack. Furthermore, that place is not safe because there may even be a third monster inside the lake, so it would be better for them to return to the clan and warn everyone. Tia also needs medical attention because she is badly injured. Rhodey lifts Tia into his arms and agrees, saying that they need to find somewhere to rest. She becomes somewhat uncomfortable and asks what he is doing because she can walk by herself. Rhodey simply asks her not to be so stubborn because she weighs less than a feather, so he could carry her all day. Once again, the atmosphere between them becomes somewhat strange, and Urka no longer feels only jealousy, but also an enormous anger growing inside her chest. At noon the following day, inside the protagonist's room in the dungeon, Anne enters and says that she has returned. Moon rises excitedly and puts on his act again, saying that she has finally come back because if she had taken any longer, he would have died from missing her. Anne is surprised and thinks that perhaps the young master has finally been moved and is willing to give her his entire heart. However, he explains that this is not what he means because she disappeared for an entire day, and if she had not returned with food, he would have starved to death. The maid apologizes because the lake is extremely far away, but says that she hurried as much as possible to bring him fresh fish. She shows him the 2 fish he requested, and the protagonist is impressed to realize that they truly smell wonderful. Anne says that she steamed one and grilled the other over an open flame, then asks which one he wants to eat first. Moon chooses the steamed fish, and she takes some of the food and feeds it to him. Moon thinks it is delicious and asks whether she would like to try some. Anne says that she cannot eat it because those dishes were prepared especially for her young master. Furthermore, she asks him to be careful because she heard that those fish contain many bones. Moon tells her not to worry so much because he is no longer a child and knows perfectly well how to eat, but suddenly he feels a fish bone become lodged in his throat. Anne climbs onto the bed and he asks what she's trying to do. The maid laughs and says that she wants a kiss. He becomes surprised and asks whether she's really thinking about that at such a moment. Anne explains that the young master is choking on a fishbone and that while the two of them kiss, she will pinch his nose shut and use her lung capacity to create a powerful suction. That way, she will be able to remove the bone quickly. He cannot believe that she is seriously suggesting such a method, but before he can do anything, she simply performs the maneuver to save him, and the two enjoy the moment a little. Moon breathes a sigh of relief and says that it was a close call because he was almost suffocating. She shows him the fishbone she managed to remove resting on the tip of her tongue. Moon thanks her for the help, but says that he would now like to eat by himself, promising that he will not choke again. As soon as he finishes eating, he lies down on the bed because the sensation is extremely pleasant. It is no wonder that the food is famous throughout the empire because it truly is delicious. Anne thinks that now that he has eaten, they could do that. Moon asks what she is actually talking about. The maid says that she would like to follow the Duke's orders and give House Campbell an heir as soon as possible. However, he asks her to wait a little, saying that it will not be possible to do that at the moment. Anne thinks that they have done it so many times throughout the week that perhaps the young master has already grown tired of her, but he says that is not the case, and she tries to understand the true reason. Moon explains that he has just eaten and that people say intense physical exertion immediately after a meal is unhealthy. Furthermore, she has also traveled a great distance, so she must be tired. Since neither of them is in their best condition, the baby they conceive might not be as healthy. Anne feels touched because the young master is worried about her health. Moon thinks that if she wants to interpret it that way, that is fine as well. In any case, he believes they could leave it until nighttime. Anne agrees, thinking that the protagonist is truly correct, so that night will be special for them. Furthermore, there is one more thing she needs to tell him. She explains that, on the way back, she passed through the city of Sevetus, which is famous for its textile industry, and for producing clothing for royalty and the nobility. The protagonist still does not understand why that is important enough for her to mention. His maid reveals that she purchased a very special outfit made from the material the young master likes so much. A shiny black full-body stocking accompanied by an additional accessory. It is said to be the latest fashion in adults-only clubs, and some people call the outfit a bunny suit. Moon imagines what she has just described and for a moment even becomes excited by the idea. However, he asks who told her that he likes such things because He is a knight, and that is not true, so she needs to stop speaking nonsense. Anne smiles and asks whether he has forgotten that she has remained beside him throughout all those years, and that inside the locked wardrobe are several rather peculiar stories. Most of them depict girls wearing the same kind of outfit she just described. It was precisely for that reason that, ever since she was a little younger, she had always worn black stockings. Furthermore, her wardrobe also contains nothing except stockings of that type because they are her young master's preference. Moon had always thought that it was merely her personal taste, but admits that she has one because he truly does love that kind of clothing. Anne thinks that he looks even more adorable when he admits such things. She says goodbye because she still needs to handle the matters left unfinished due to her trip and promises to return at night. The protagonist asks her not to overwork herself because he will rest and prepare for that evening. As soon as she leaves, he removes several fish bones he had hidden inside his mouth and thinks that his objective has been achieved because she is finally gone. The black book shows that it is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. According to that week's schedule, Anne should finish her work at around 6 o'clock, which means that he still has 3 hours, and that is more than enough time. Moon rushes toward the door and uses his fishbone lock-picking technique, but when he examines the inside of the lock, he realizes that it contains 12 pins. He falls backward, wondering whether this is some kind of joke. According to the lock's mechanism, after inserting the fishbone, he needs to align every pin in the same position as the key. If even one remains out of place, they will all return to their initial positions. Furthermore, the fishbone is extremely fragile, and the recoil force can easily break it. If that happens, the tool will become useless. He possesses only 4 fishbones with the necessary length and strength, but that is not even the worst part. If he fails, Anne will see the broken bones inside the lock when she returns, and from that moment onward, he will never be able to use the trick to attempt another escape. That means this is his only opportunity. If he fails, he will have to spend the rest of his life in that place. Sometime later, he tries again but begins to despair because he still has not made any progress and has already wasted an hour and a half. More time passes, and he summons the black book because it is already almost 5 o'clock in the afternoon, meaning that approximately 1 hour remains before she returns with his food. Furthermore, he has only 1 fish bone left for another attempt. He holds the bone once again and thinks that none of that matters because he has already completely mastered the pattern of the first 10 pins, and since this is his final hope, he must succeed. He activates his fishbone lockpicking technique and uses it at maximum intensity. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Noel tastes some of the food and thinks that it is far too delicious. It is no wonder that the fish from that lake are so famous, because this is the finest fish soup she has ever tasted. Anne praises Noel because, thanks to her assistance, they managed to prepare dinner an hour earlier, and the soup's flavor became even better. Noel becomes happy, but says that it was nothing because she merely offered a little help, and all the credit belongs to the head maid, who is extremely skilled at seasoning food. However, she comments that she has noticed Anne is always learning to prepare new dishes. But now that the lord and lady have left, and the young master is at the academy, only the maids remain inside the mansion. Furthermore, she has also noticed that whenever Anne finishes cooking, she sets aside a portion of the food and that, throughout the past few days, they have spent quite a lot of time eating fish. Anne prepares herself to attack in case she has been discovered. Noel says that she has figured it out and that her older sister is probably secretly raising a small pet somewhere inside the mansion, perhaps a kitten. However, she remembers that the young master cannot tolerate animals. Furthermore, their fur spreads everywhere, which was precisely why they had never kept cats or dogs inside the mansion. She reaches a new conclusion because raising a pet without permission is technically breaking the household rules, and since her older sister is the head maid, she cannot tell anyone because of her position. Anne feels relieved that she has not been discovered and will not need to do anything unnecessary. So, she asks her close friend to keep the matter a secret between them. Noel says that she does not need to worry because she also loves those furry little creatures. When she lived in the countryside with her grandmother, they owned many animals. Therefore, she would like to know whether she could accompany Anne to see the kitten. Anne apologizes and explains that the little creature is still extremely afraid of strangers, so perhaps in the future, once it grows a little, Noel can visit it. Noel understands that this makes sense because raising a small creature is not easy. As Anne carries the meal to her young master, she thinks that fortunately they did not reach the worst possible outcome because silently making a maid's body disappear without anyone noticing would be extremely difficult. However, what Noel said gave her an excellent idea. Remaining locked away for so long will eventually drive the protagonist insane, and at the moment, she still does not feel anything unusual within her body. Even if she is already pregnant, there would still be 10 months until the birth. Therefore, besides books, she should consider giving him a pet to ease the loneliness he is probably feeling, and a cat would be an excellent option. However, she does not know what color he would prefer. Golden fur would match his hair, but he likes black stockings. Perhaps it would be better to ask him directly when she delivers the food. However, as soon as she arrives at the cell, she cannot believe what she sees. The door is open, and the protagonist is no longer there. Moon has finally managed to escape. Furthermore, that cell was located within an underground sewer passage, and the wind was blowing in that direction, so the exit should be somewhere ahead. He pushes several wooden boards aside, but the place is so dark that he can barely see his own hands because of the lack of light and all the filth. Since he is already quite far from the place where he was imprisoned, there should be no problem with using his light spell. That way, he will be able to move forward more quickly, but at that very moment, a knife strikes the wall beside him. He cannot believe that she has already managed to catch up to him after all the running he did, and, driven mad by his attempt to escape, screams that she has finally found him. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new content. Thank you.